Explaining Tipping Culture in America. Welcome back to English with Billy, the podcast where we explore the quirks, traditions, and stories that make the world a fascinating place. I'm your host, Billy, and today we're diving into a topic that often confuses visitors to the United States: tipping culture. If you've ever traveled to the U.S., you've probably experienced it. You finish a meal at a restaurant, and the server brings you the bill. You pay, but you're also expected to leave an extra amount, called a tip, for the person who served you. But why do Americans tip so much? And how does it work? In this episode, we'll explore the history of tipping in the U.S., where it is expected, and how it affects workers. We'll also give you some tips, pun intended, on how to handle tipping situations when you visit. Let's start with the history. Tipping actually began in Europe, but it became a big part of American life after the Civil War in the 1800s. Wealthy Americans who had traveled to Europe brought the idea back with them. They thought it was a way to show that they were sophisticated. But there's a darker side to the story, too. After the end of slavery, some businesses didn't want to pay newly freed black workers a regular salary. Instead, they told these workers to live on tips from customers. This practice became common in the hospitality industry and continues today. Here's a new word: hospitality. Hospitality refers to businesses like hotels, restaurants, and bars, where the goal is to make people feel welcome and comfortable. Workers in these industries often depend on tips to make a living. So, how does tipping work today? In the U.S., tipping is not just a way to say thank you. It's an essential part of how workers make money. For example, the federal minimum wage for tipped workers is only $2.13 per hour. That's very low, so servers and bartenders rely on tips to earn a livable income. The standard tip at a restaurant is 15% to 20% of the total bill. If your server did a fantastic job, 20% or more is common. If the service was not great, some people leave 10%, but it's usually seen as rude to leave nothing at all. You're also expected to tip in other places, like bars, hair salons, and when you take a taxi. Even hotel staff, like housekeepers and bellhops, usually receive tips. It can feel like you're always tipping, but for many workers, these extra amounts make a big difference. Why do people tip? Part of it is social pressure. You don't want to seem cheap or unkind. But tipping is also about showing appreciation for good service. In some cases, tipping even motivates workers to do a better job because they know they'll be rewarded. There's also an interesting psychological aspect to tipping. Psychology is the study of the mind and behavior. Research shows that customers tend to tip more if the server is friendly or does something extra, like remembering your name or drawing a smiley face on your bill. It's a way to make the experience feel personal. But there are criticisms of tipping culture, too. Some people argue that it's unfair to make customers responsible for a worker's income. They believe restaurants and businesses should pay higher wages so that workers don't have to depend on tips. In some U.S. cities, there is a movement to raise the minimum wage for all workers, including those in hospitality. If you're planning to visit the United States, tipping might feel overwhelming at first. Here's a quick guide to make it easier. 1. Restaurants. Leave 15% to 20% of the total bill. If the service was outstanding, 25% is a nice gesture. 2. Bars. Tip $1 or $2 per drink. If you order a complicated cocktail, you can tip more. 3. Taxis and ride shares. Tip 10 to 15% of the fare, depending on the quality of the ride. 4. Hotels. Tip housekeepers $2 to $5 per night and give bellhops $1 to $2 per bag they carry for you. 5. Hair salons and spas. A tip of 15% to 20% is standard. Some people also tip when they get food delivered or when someone helps them with their luggage at the airport. Remember, it's okay if you don't get everything perfect. Most workers appreciate any tip you leave, as long as it's given with kindness. Let's learn the word etiquette. Etiquette means the rules of polite behavior in society or a specific situation. Tipping etiquette in the U.S. is different from other countries, so it's important to understand what's expected. Is tipping culture changing? In some ways, yes. The rise of apps like Uber and DoorDash has made tipping even more common, as you're usually asked to add a tip when you pay on your phone. However, there are also restaurants experimenting with a no-tipping policy. These restaurants pay their staff higher wages and include the cost of service in the price of the meal. Still, tipping is so deeply ingrained in American culture that it's hard to imagine it disappearing anytime soon. For now, understanding tipping culture will make your visits to the U.S. smoother and more enjoyable. Tipping in America might seem complicated, but it's a way to show appreciation and support workers. Even if you come from a country where tipping isn't the norm, understanding these customs can help you feel more confident when you visit. Thank you for joining me today on English with Billy. I hope this episode made the world of tipping a little clearer. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and come back for more stories about life, culture, and human behavior. Until next time, stay curious.